right, so for tonight, I'm covering one of the topics that I really love. So this topic on unequal access to credit, we're going to be focusing tonight a lot on like the credit market and discrimination that exists within the credit market. I'm also going to be talking about some of the warning signs of credit discrimination, and then look at some of the protections that are in place. So some of the legislations that exist for us as consumers, just to know our rights and what that mean for us. And at the end, I'll be providing some additional resources to share with you as well. So as we jump in, we love to use the chat. You guys have already started using the chat, which is wonderful. So I have a question for you. As we're thinking about credit and we're going to dive into this piece about unequal access to credit, I have a question for you. So please feel free to respond in the chat. So my question for you is, what are some big ticket items that credit allows us to purchase? So when you're thinking about like some of the bigger things that is hard to achieve just straight out of pocket, so just come up with the cash for it. So I'm seeing some things in the chat: car, vacations. I see RV, house, boat, school, so paying for your education, starting a new business, doing like home improvements, vehicles again. So yeah, a lot of big ticket items that if it wasn't for credit, some of us would be have a hard time like purchasing right away. Now, moving into what access actually looks like and what it means, there are different ways. Who allows us? How do we gain access to credit? What we really know from research and from a lot of, I'm going to say, social justice organizations that work on behalf of consumers, what we really know is that the lack of access to what we call reasonable credit makes it hard for us to purchase those things. It makes it hard for us to do home improvement, makes it hard for us to get like either a new or used vehicle that we need to take us to where we need to go. So we do know that with not having like access to that, it limits what we can do. It limits the things that we want to do and the things that we want to achieve. So we understand that much about like what credit does for us and how it helps us to gain access to certain things that, again, we wouldn't be able to have access to right out of the pocket. Now, the credit discrimination market, thinking about like what unlawful discrimination means, it just means that there's like the unfair and unjust treatment of an individual based on their membership in a particular group. When it comes to credit discrimination, we try to be a little bit more specific to know that yes, discrimination broadly versus credit discrimination, it has to do with just different treatment, so unfair and unjust treatment based on you belonging to certain groups that you might face when you go to like take out a credit. So whether it's like doing over the phone an application in person, or even just exploring what your options are. Like we're going to be talking about like some of those protected categories of how people are discriminated, but a big part of understanding just like the difference between credit discrimination and discrimination in general is just looking to see what are some specific things that people might face when they're going to look for credit options and how that might impede what they're trying to accomplish. So in the chat, Seisha is sharing some links in the chat. So we like to try to provide resources. So as I'm going along, just know that you can check out like the different resources that we put in, because all of our information that we do use, of course, we want to share with you so that you have access and you can go in and read more about like the topics that we cover. The next thing I want to talk about is a type of discrimination. So this again goes back to kind of like the broad category, but as it relates to credit, when we look at I'm going to look at two types of discrimination. So we're going to look at disparate treatment, and this just shows that an applicant might be treated differently based on what we call protected categories. And again, I will go into more details further on in the presentation. So whether it's like gender, race, age, so being treated differently. And this, of course, can be something that might be intentional, and it can also be subtle in some way. So it's hard to tell sometimes, but it's when that applicant feel like they're being treated differently based on some of these characteristics. Another type is the impact piece. So this is when a lender would apply kind of like a policy that is supposed to go to all applicants, but somehow that policy kinds of put a burden on people who fall within a certain category, within a certain group. And so that policy, even though it's meant to look or mirror for everybody, it does not serve everybody correctly. And I will go into an example where this comes into play with like an insurance example. So this just tells us that within like discrimination and looking specifically at credit discrimination, there are different types. Some pieces might be the intentional where, there's no hiding the fact that it is discriminated against a certain group, but there are lots of times when it might come off unintentional and it might seem as it's a neutral policy that's supposed to benefit all, but it really doesn't. All right, as I'm going along, please feel free if you have any questions or comment, go ahead and share those in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. I also wanted to share some examples because a lot of times when I talk about credit discrimination in some of my classes or trainings that I do, I always hear people saying things like, how does this affect me? I'm not a lender. Why does this matter? So a big part in planning this lesson, and Kathy and I have been planning on this lesson for like over a year now, and it just worked out great that it worked out for this series. But an important piece in like planning this lesson is I've used like bits and pieces of it in like different classes and different trainings, but this is the first time doing a full presentation on it. So I wanted to share some important information relating to how we see it in our society today. So this is an example of a study that the National Fair Housing Alliance did with Zillow. So they surveyed over 10,000 adults in America, so in like 20 metropolitan areas, just trying to find out or hear from people, just their perception or their beliefs or things that they have experienced. So it's validating people's experiences. So talking to folks and wondering, what is going on and how have your experiences been in the housing market as you're exploring like the options that you want for yourself, the options that you want for your family. And so they found that out of all the people that they surveyed, that 25% believe that at some point in their lives, they had experienced some kind of housing discrimination. And this is a part of their effort, both the National Fair Housing Alliance and Zillow's effort to just understand what our consumer experiencing as they're like shopping for house and trying to find out what are some of the different pieces that they need to know about like consumer experiences. Another example, and I see some questions coming in the chat, so thank you to my co-host for highlighting some of those questions. So the other example that I want to talk about has to do with this same agency that did one on analyzing just like different car dealerships. And so they looked at how like customers were interacted with, and they found that when they looked at like the analysis from these different car dealerships, they found that for white testers, so you go in looking for a vehicle, you're shopping around, you're trying to get a good experience, learn about like what your options are for financing, the type of vehicle that you want, and if you want to work with this lender or not, or with this dealership or not. So what they found was that white testers were far more likely to be taken seriously. They were presumed to be more qualified, and also they just received better service, better quality service overall. And a big part of that has to do with how this agency or this alliance is trying to understand what these people's experiences are. And so just talking with or surveying different customers, they get to understand what people's experiences are. Another piece that I want to talk about, I see a question in there. So it says, were the white testers male? It's mixed gendered. So thanks for that question. All right, thank you. Keep the questions coming. We love questions. Another piece that I want to talk about as we look at credit discrimination. So just to debrief from like those two examples. Again, I use those examples just to show how different agencies try to evaluate customer experience to see what their customers are saying about their business. Sometimes, of course, it's for marketing, and sometimes it is related to different things relating to civil rights and equal justice pieces to help consumers have better experiences as they try to apply and obtain credit. All right. looking at some warning signs. How do you know if you're being discriminated against? That's an interesting piece. And I think when we have different people thinking about like what that discrimination look like, so whether it's based on age, race, gender, sexuality, people have different experiences, and so how they interpret their experience and how they respond to what they're perceiving is just based on who they are and how they perceive what's happening to them. So this is an important piece, because with the warning signs, there's some things that are blatant, right? There's some things that are in our face, and we are all smart people, so we know and we see and we say, okay, that does not sound right. That does not sound like something you should be saying, or how that lender should be interacting with you or with another person that you hear. So some of the warning signs include like being treated differently in person than on the phone. And I have an example from this. When I was in grad school, and one of my professors, she said that she was in kind of like a legal battle with a rental company, because she had a great conversation with them over the phone, and when she went in person, it was like a different experience, and so she had evidence to back it up. So like she was able to prove how she felt discriminated against. So that's just one example. Another time could be you hear negative comments. So sometimes it's just overhearing things. If somebody's saying something and they're not necessarily paying attention to where they are, and other people around them might hear, or the person, the borrower, might hear. So they might say something negative, and then other people hear it and they know what that's coming from. Another piece, of course, has to do with being denied for no reason. So no justification, no really good explanation. And I think that's hard sometimes, because for lenders, they have rights in how and deciding how and who they lend credit to. But the discrimination piece come in when they violate those protective categories. Another piece has to do with offers that kind of seem so good to be true, too good to be true, and trying to make sure that you are agreeing to the right interest rate or the other parts and other terms of the loan. So making sure that you read through things and not feel pressured to sign. All right, are there any other questions? I think I see one in here that says,
we've got two that might take a little more doing, or maybe you're coming to it still, Kamaya.
okay.
One question was, and I think you've touched on this since it was asked, but how does one prove credit discrimination? And I don't know if you want to tackle that now.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll let you go with that.
Yeah, and we can, and of course, we'll go into some of this before. So we have like a number of consumer protection agencies that work with individuals who have experienced credit discrimination. So it could be making notes on what you're experiencing in one-on-one conversations with the person, and also providing the evidence that you need. So if you have like all your credit information and they said one thing to you up front, that this all looks good, you might be able to qualify for this loan, and abruptly they withdraw for no really good reason or no given reason. So there's some different ways, and I'll go into some of that further on, but good questions, keep them coming.
And then you have another one, and it might need clarification, and maybe you can ask for that, is any information on interest rates. So I assume that means different interest rates. But Cynthia, we might need more from you on the chat to understand that.
Yes, please. Let us know.
So we can come back to that, but I just keeping track here.
All right. Thank you, Kathy. All right, so we are at a point in the presentation, and if you have more questions, again, we welcome them. When we are going to be doing breakout rooms, if you haven't done it before, we will put you in a breakout room for 5 minutes, and then we will pull you back out after. So the question that we would like you, and we're asking as you go into the breakout room, if somebody wants to take the lead and get going on discussion, that will be great, because you'll have 5 minutes and your input is valuable. So for this piece with the breakout rooms, the question I would like you to consider as you go into them is, creditors have a right to evaluate applicants' background information. What are some personal facts that they can lawfully examine? So as creditors are deciding whether or not to lend to somebody, what are some things that they can lawfully look at? Because of course they want to make sure that you'll be able to give them back their money. So with the interest, so what are some of those things that they can look through?
I think we've got everybody pretty much back. Kamaya?
All right, wonderful. So how did it go? Just kidding. So for the breakout rooms, what were some of the answers that you all got from your discussions? What were some things that you talked about? Like what can creditors evaluate?
Do you want this typed in the chat or?
Yeah, please go ahead and share in the chat. Thank you for asking. So job history, income, previous employment, previous address, debt to income ratio, where you live, credit scores, references, tax information, marital status.
Social security number as well.
Yes. And an important point too with the where you live is an important piece, because within the credit market, while it is of course lawful for them to ask like address, they cannot discriminate based on where you live. So that's one of the protected factors that I just wanted to highlight from that. All right, previous names, great. Some great responses that came in. Thank you all. You have all been wonderful participating in all of this, so great. We are going to move on to talk a little bit about, not just credit discrimination as we've been talking about it, but also to looking at the number of folks in the United States who do not have like a really well-developed credit history. And researchers call these like the credit invisible. So approximately 26 million Americans do not have any credit history with one or three of the major credit bureaus. So when we think about those, we're thinking about like Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian. And credit invisibility has to do with a number of factors. So I remember having like a conversation once with a young lady, and she says, I don't like using credit for anything. I just like to pay my cash and get things done, and anything that I'm taking care of, I just want to take care of it out of pocket because I don't owe anybody anything. So I've had conversations like that where people are highly credit averse and they don't like to use a lot of credit, and that of course, like not having like that rich credit history. There are other folks who might be credit invisible for other reasons. So it could be other reasons where they feel marginalized within the credit market, where they don't have access to quality credit. And it just makes it a lot harder to try to obtain the things that they do want. Now, for talking about like credit invisibility, this is one, again, like I said, it can get tricky. For a lot of times, some people do choose not to partake with using like a lot of credit, but there are also folks who just have experiences with different things that have prevented them from having to gain access to credit. Now, Kathy, is there anything else you would like to share about like credit invisibility?
I think that sometimes when we think about credit, we just kind of what you're saying, we forget that not everybody can obtain credit. And that means that they're probably going to be paying more for certain things, like when they go to get their utilities turned on, they'll have a higher deposit, or when they try to take out a loan, it'll be at a higher interest rate. So, that's why we're concerned about it, is that everybody doesn't have access to starting credit. Mm-hmm. And there's some ways around it that we'll probably talk about in other webinars, but it can definitely be an issue.
Yes.
So, all right.
And in highlighting this as well too, and an important piece for it is there's not the good and bad kind of toggle. And this was my conversation with the young lady that I was talking to as well too, when she was saying that she hates credit and tries not to use it. I'm like, there's absolutely nothing wrong with not wanting to use a lot of credit, but people make decisions and what's best for them and at what point in their lives it matters. Well, great questions. Thank you. All right, so just moving along. We've been talking about like the discrimination piece. Now for me, I know that this is a hard topic. So when you mix discrimination with like money topics, yes, they get hard, they get heavy, they get loaded. But like I said in the beginning, this is one of my favorite topics for a lot of reasons. And one of those reasons is for people who experience discrimination. And going back to one of the questions that was asked earlier about how can you prove that? And for a lot of people is they have written information. So it could be an email, it could be a voicemail that they get, and it could be just like different terms in their application or their contract that they have. And when they compare it to like somebody else, they see the differences in there. So a lot of different ways in how people try to prove that they were discriminated against. So in proving that and looking to see like what are some of the protections that are available to us as consumers and why this matters. Yes, a good credit rating is important for lenders to decide or credit worthiness and to decide if they want to lend to us or not. And they do have that right to evaluate our credit information. But us as consumers, we also have rights. And one of those rights is to a free credit report. And us as educators, we talk about this a lot. So you will hear it over and over when you join our webinars. And so having access to know what is on there, so it doesn't surprise you. When you're going in, you're looking for a new car. I know like I have some friends who are looking at new cars right now because of some other dealerships that are looking to get rid of vehicles. So knowing what's on your credit reports can give you a clearer picture of what to expect when you go in to talk to like a lender. So knowing what your rights are and knowing that you have access to that. And Seisha just shared like the link to finding more information about how to obtain like your credit report at annualcreditreport.com. Right. Another one that I wanted to talk about is something specific to when it comes to like, how do people discriminate and what are the categories for those? And I've been hinting at it all night. You're like, when is she going to show us? I'm going to show you now. So looking at like some of the consumer protection laws, the Equal Credit Opportunity Act makes it illegal for creditors to discriminate in any aspect of credit transaction. And that's based on your national origin, your educational background, disability, housing. So again, going back to what I said about like where you live, your employment, your race, different pieces like that. So important part of like this act has to do with looking to see what are the categories that are protected under federal law, and why does it matter that us as consumers know that somebody cannot discriminate against us if we're going in to buy a new car just because of our gender or because of our age. So with these protective categories, a big part of understanding what they are is knowing like our credit history, again, making sure that when we're going in to look for credit, that we feel satisfied. We feel satisfied with the service that we receive, with the terms of the loan, because we're comparing, we're looking to see what we would get from like maybe another dealer or other dealerships to see if we're getting like the right terms of the loans and we are getting the same rate that they would give to everybody else. Are there any other questions? I'm looking in the chat real quick. But even before that, we have like another polling question. We try to get you engaged. So thank you all for participating. So this poll question, do you believe you have experienced credit discrimination based on any of these protected categories? So again, those protected categories were national origin, race, age, disability, gender, housing, education, employment. And the poll is going, so thank you all.
Kamaya, while the poll's coming in, there's a question here that I think we should answer out loud.
Okay.
So Allison asks, can they discriminate on age because a younger person's credit history is younger? And it's complex enough, I don't want to do it in the chat.
Yeah.
So we'll allow a few more questions to come in, and I don't know if you want to take that one or how we want to deal with that. But.
So can they discriminate based on age?
Can you discriminate on age because a younger person's credit history is younger? I think the simple answer is there isn't just one formula, and the formulas are for the credit score, and so the formulas are adjusted for age. Because for example, we talk about having a longer credit history helps somebody, but it's going to be different if you're 20 than if you're 60. So they adjust for that. So for in that sense, I know there's adjustment. As far as I know, they cannot discriminate on age.
Yeah, it's.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead, and we do have another webinar on credit reports and scores, so I think we're going to save some of those for later in the summer. Join us. I'm going to launch this. Are we good? We got 92%.
All
So
right.
I will
So
share
we
the
have the
results.
results of our poll. Do you believe you've experienced credit discrimination based on any of these protected categories? So we have 15% of people saying yes, they did. 60% said no, and 25% says maybe. Well, thank you all for sharing that. We wanted to do a poll so you didn't have to write anything in the chat, so we appreciate that. All right, are there any immediate questions that we need to tackle before I move on?
I think Seisha's got them covered.
Great, thank you. My colleagues rock. All right, so the other piece that I want to talk about relating to protection, and I wanted to focus a little bit more on housing because it's a big one. It is a big one when we think about like credit, when we think about where we want to live, where we see our future. Housing becomes a big one for a lot of us. So the Fair Housing Act makes it illegal to change up like the terms of certain loans. And it also makes it illegal to discourage people from applying for like credit. This act also goes in conjunction with like the Illinois Human Rights Act, which makes it illegal to discriminate in like in real estate transaction. And this becomes an important piece for a lot of people who are looking to see where they would like to live and build their future. And I wanted to focus specifically on Illinois, of course, to just apply how it's relevant for a lot of like our Illinois residents who are joining us on this webinar tonight. So it prohibits discrimination in real estate transaction. So whether it's on your house, whether it's on a condo, your vacant land, different pieces like that. So there are laws that do protect us and makes it hard and makes it a little more challenging sometimes to even think about how long-term things will affect us and how our lives like intersect. The other piece I want to talk about in terms of protection are some of the activities specifically. So we can talk kind of vaguely about like what it looks like, what these protection looks like, and how they supposed to guide lenders' decisions, but looking at like what are some of those specific things. So for example, you're shopping around, whether it is for a new house or you're looking for a rental property and you're working with a particular lender. So their failure to disclose like certain property listing as well. So having like some evidence that they're refusing to show you some places can make it, of course, illegal for a lot of people. Also expressing orally or in writing the intent to do unlawful actions. And a lot of times people don't come out and just like blatantly say things, but sometimes it does happen. Another piece, of course, the last part I want to talk about is like changing the terms and conditions or privileges of the transaction. So going into it and kind of getting close to the end and they decide that they want to make certain changes right in the middle of what you're trying to do. So these are some of the prohibited activities. And again, Seisha is sharing some information, more information that you can read up on from the Illinois Department of Human Rights, that you can find more information on that. Another example that I wanted to focus on, so thinking about how we understand what credit discrimination is, but just also looking at like the effects. And we'll provide the resource for this report as well too, because I think this is a good one that focuses on like what are some of the effects of creating policies that we think are general, but it also kind of inadvertently affects like a particular group of people. So this one is an example from the Consumer Reports. They did a study where they looked at car insurers in the United States. So they looked at insurers who were looking at different policies that they wanted to implement, and they did end up implementing like these policies that they thought would apply to all their drivers. But the policy in itself, middle-aged drivers were overwhelmingly given higher premiums than other drivers. So it was one of those policies that, and a part of this report, it got a little bit intricate for me, but from my base understanding of how all of that, the report that they did to just try to find out and learn more about like what the information that they got from the drivers to understand how this policy had affected them. But what they ultimately found was that the middle-aged drivers were overwhelmingly given higher increases than other age groups. All right. Again, if you have questions, please share them in the chat. I'm going to move on to like a different part in thinking about like credit discrimination and how that affects us, and tying it back to just like the intersectionality of our lives and knowing that other pieces when it comes to discrimination, how that might affect us individually. So even if it doesn't affect us individually, but people that we know and other situations that we have seen. And some of the resources that I wanted to provide were things that you can explore on your own. I did like this wonderful implicit bias test that's through Hawaii State University. And so we hear a lot about the implicit bias and think about all of that through like our different experiences. But through this experience, we get to think about like how we understand things. So of course with implicit bias is the attitudes and stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. So a big part with like exploring like this resource is just understanding a little bit about how our actions and our behaviors, how those things might be kind of like unconscious to us. And I challenge this, not because you are lenders going out there giving money to people, but just for us as individuals, as we explore a little bit more about who we are. And I really like things like this because I get to be like, I didn't know this about myself. Okay, I need to think more about how I think about this particular issue or this particular topic as it relates to like our human experience. So if you have the time, it's a great one to explore. I have a few more in here as well too. There's a great YouTube video that says inclusion starts with I. And I, again, I'm using like these as examples to connect us to, you know, who we are. And lenders are people, right? So the people that we're working with to gain credit, these are people who have like their own belief system and have their own value base. So kind of put yourself in the place of the lender. And if I see this video and I think about like, who am I and how my experiences affect how I interact with other people and how my overall experiences may benefit someone. So again, I challenge you to explore like these options and understanding like what biases might be out there and recognizing like some of our privileges. All right, are there any questions as you're moving along? Okay. So I wanted to kind of close out a little bit with talking about, you know, trying to prove if credit discrimination does occur and what you need to do. Who's there to help you? You're in this position where you're gathering evidence to show that you have faced like some level of credit discrimination. Where do you turn to? What information do you need to know? And who's going to be there to have your back to help you figure it out? Well, there are a number of resources, and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau work with consumers to try to understand their experiences. So a big part of course, their job is the consumer protection piece, but also to hear complaints from consumers about what they have gone through and what their experiences have. The FTC also works with that as well, just to hear different complaints and try to provide guidelines and guidance for people as they're trying to make sense of what they have experienced. So I wanted to share that as well. And I also wanted to say, for people who have been discriminated against, like, why does it matter if you do share a complaint? Even if the actions that you're hoping will come out of your case does not come out of your case. And of course that can be discouraging, but why is it important to share information relating to like those types of experiences? It helps us as consumer connect with like financial companies to just help them understand, because we're thinking about like the people at the higher level, they might not know what's going on sometimes. And so helping them to understand what us as consumers are going through. And it also helps others when we do put the information out there to share like those experiences. Any questions? So did we miss any questions as we're going along? And again,
I feel like we've covered the ones, but if I miss something, I was trying to take notes, but if I miss something, feel free to put it back in the chat. We've had some good conversations and things have scrolled a while, so we might have missed something.
Right. And I will say, like, this is again one of my favorite topics to talk about, and I just touched on a few things. This is a lot more intricate, and I was telling Kathy earlier this week that I was looking at some things related to housing discrimination and went down kind of like a rabbit hole, but there's a lot to it, and I am very happy that you came on to hear like this perspective. But when it comes to like credit discrimination, it's intricate and there's a lot of different pieces, but there are resources to help consumers as they're trying to understand like those experiences. All right, seeing if there's any questions.
Well, I think you've given us some really fantastic resources and things to think about. I know I'm going to go back and reread a few of these and reacquaint myself with some of it. I think I'm really pleased that you were able to offer this for us. Thank you, Kamaya.
Yes, my pleasure. Oop, I see some new messages.
Which then Seisha does remind us that we have an evaluation where you can go and put it in the chat and get give us some feedback, because we're learning and we always appreciate the feedback. And we will be sending out a link to this recording. It may take us almost a week. We do our best to get it posted as fast as we can. And we do summarize the links in the email. We haven't been sending out the PowerPoint slides, but all the links and resources and much of the conversation we kind of summarize and get it in there for you. So thank you everybody for joining us.
Can I just kind of come in here and give her another example of discrimination, like at a car lot? She was talking about the difference between over the phone and in person.
Yes.
My husband and I tried an experiment one time. We went to a car lot dressed in blue jeans and t-shirts, and not one salesman came out to talk to us while we were on the lot. The next day we went back, I was in a skirt and blouse and he was in a suit, and they about broke their neck to get out to us. So just the difference in the way we were dressed. Same two people, same salesman, just we looked like we had more money the second day.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
There's a question if you're denied credit. If you are denied credit, and it has to do with your credit history. They have to tell you which credit bureau they pulled the information from, and then you definitely want to check that. You're entitled to a free report if they declined you because of your credit history, then you're entitled to a free report. If you are declined for another reason, I would ask them why, and they should give you a reason. It could be, I'm just going to say, sometimes that lender doesn't have money to lend that day. You might try a different lender. So that's another possibility. It has nothing to do with you, but has to do with the current credit market or that particular lender. So
Latrice have a great comment in the chat too. Remember to ask. A lot of people don't ask why.
And Allison, I'm sorry you had that experience of somebody pushing your income to try to get you a loan. Typically, I don't feel like that's actually helpful in the long run. Not to mention that it's probably illegal, but anyway. So my experience is, yeah, if the credit market can be a challenge. Always good to comparison shop. So I think, Kamaya, while you handle more questions, I'm going to
Yes.
start moving Money Mentors into a breakout room so we can continue some of that conversation over there. And maybe, Seisha, you could jump in there too.
Sounds good. And Kamai, when you're ready, just come over.
All right.
Yep.
Sounds good.
And I think this might be a good time for us to say thank you to everybody. We'll stick around for some questions, but I am going
Yeah.
to stop recording.
Yes.